Maya Kim had never been special. At least, that was what she told herself every night when she returned to her cramped one-room apartment, her shoes soaked in sweat and city dust after a double shift at the cafe. She was 24, with nothing to her name except an overused notebook full of scribbles, a mother who called once a month to ask about rent, and a habit of running after buses. It was a bus, in fact, that changed everything. That morning, she had been late again. The sun hadn't even risen, and she was clutching her worn bag as she darted across the street. The bus was crowded, passengers pressed against one another like sardines, but she squeezed in. She remembered gripping the cold metal bar near the back, her breath fogging the glass. Then, the screech of tires. The lurch, a deafening crash. When Maya woke, it was to the sterile whiteness of a hospital ward. Pain throbbed through her skull, and her body felt as if it had been torn apart and stitched back together. The doctors called it a miracle, just a concussion, they said, as though that explained why she had survived when others hadn't. But the miracle carried something else. At first, she thought she was losing her mind. The whispers began softly, trickling into her head like an echo. God, I hope my shift ends soon. Don't forget to buy flowers for Mom. Why is that girl staring at me? Maya looked around the ward, wide-eyed. The patients were silent, but their thoughts clung to her like static. By the time she returned to work at the cafe, she realized it wasn't a hallucination. She could hear people, their words, their secrets, their hidden truths. It was terrifying. She learned that her boss deducted from her paycheck while pretending it was a tax. That the kind-looking customer who tipped generously was secretly cheating on his wife. That the girl who smiled at her daily believed she was pitiful. The voices were relentless, pouring in every time she entered a room. She would clutch her head, praying for silence, but silence never came. Until one evening, the cafe bell chimed, and she turned automatically, tray in hand. A man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked sharper than anything she had ever touched. His presence drew eyes. He was not a man who belonged in their shabby cafe. And then, his thought struck her. She hasn't changed. 15 years, and she's still the same girl by the window. Maya froze, her hand trembling. She looked at him closely, but his face was unfamiliar. Dark eyes, firm jawline, expensive watch, she would remember someone like him. And yet, in his mind, she lived. The man approached the counter. One Americano. To stay. She nodded mutely, but inside her head his voice continued. Don't look too long. She'll notice. God, if she only knew I've carried this for 15 years. Maya nearly spilled the coffee. 15 years, what was he talking about? When he sat at a corner table, she risked another glance. His name came from the chatter of two students near the door, Adrian Lee, CEO of one of the city's largest real estate firms. She had seen the name on billboards and business headlines, but never imagined him drinking in her cafe. And yet his thoughts were about her. Over the next week, Adrian returned. Always at the same hour, always ordering the same drink. He rarely spoke beyond pleasantries, his face unreadable, but his mind told a different story. She looks tired. Is she eating enough? She probably doesn't remember me. Why would she? I was invisible back then. If she smiles, maybe I'll survive another day. Maya's chest tightened. Invisible. School. She sifted through her memories of crowded classrooms, of borrowed textbooks and scribbled. Poetry. There had been quiet boys at the edges of her vision, but she couldn't recall any named Adrian. And yet, to him, she had been unforgettable. The night the rain poured hardest, Adrian stayed after closing. Maya was wiping tables when she realized he hadn't left. He stood near the counter, coat draped over his arm, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. Do you, he asked softly, remember me? From school. Maya shook her head, shame prickling her chest. His lips curved faintly, though she heard the sting in his thoughts. Of course she doesn't. Why would she remember a boy who never spoke? The guilt was unbearable. She wanted to tell him she knew. Oh, she knew everything he thought, every secret longing he'd buried, but how could she? How could she confess something so impossible? Weeks blurred into months. Adrian became a fixture in her evenings, his tailored figure so out of place among the cracked tables and flickering lights of the cafe. He never overstepped, never pressed. But in his mind, he confessed 1,000 times. If she lets me, I'd give her the world. She deserves more than this cafe. More than me, even. Don't say it. Don't scare her away. Maya's heart, once armored by poverty and disappointment, began to crack. She found herself waiting for his visits, listening for the soft cadence of his thoughts. She wanted to believe them, not as a burden, but as proof that someone, somewhere, had once seen her as more than ordinary. The breaking point came one winter night. She had fainted outside the cafe, her body collapsing from exhaustion. When she opened her eyes again, she was not in her room but in a vast apartment, wrapped in blankets softer than anything she had touched before. Adrian sat beside her, his usually composed face etched with worry. "You're awake," he breathed, relief flooding his features. But his mind screamed louder, "She works herself to death. If only she'd let me take care of her. God, I'd give her everything, if she'd just let me stay by her side." Maya's throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian hesitated, then said aloud, "Because I owe you more than you realize." But in his mind, "Because I've loved you since I was 13. Because you were the only light in a boy's dark world. Because 15 years later, you still are." Tears slid down Maya's cheeks. He didn't even know she had heard. For days, she carried the secret like a burning coal. She wanted to tell him, to release the truth, but what if he thought her insane? What if the fragile bond between them shattered? And yet, hiding from it was impossible. She had spent her whole life being unseen, unloved. And here was a man who had loved her in silence for 15 years. She couldn't let fear steal that away. One evening, she found him waiting outside the cafe. The city lights glimmered behind him, neon spilling across the pavement. He looked at her the way he always did, calm on the outside, turmoil inside. "Don't say it. If she rejects me, I won't survive." Maya stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Adrian," she said, her voice breaking. "There's something you should know." He froze. His thoughts tumbled wildly. She knows. She remembers. Please, God, let her feel the same. Maya smiled through her tears, the first true smile she had given him. "I remember nothing," she whispered, "and yet, I know everything." And before doubt could silence her, she reached for his hand, letting the courage he had never found mirror in her own. That night, the whispers in Maya's mind were no longer curses. They were a confession finally heard. A love no longer silent. For the first time since the bus crash, Maya felt that perhaps her strange gift had been no accident at all. Perhaps it had been fate's way of showing her what she had missed all along. That she had always been extraordinary, at least, to him. Maya Kim was used to being invisible. She was 24, working long hours at a cramped cafe, living in a rented room that smelled of damp plaster. Life was a cycle of debt and exhaustion. She had no time for dreams, only for survival. That morning, she was late again. The bus was crowded, and she managed to squeeze herself into a corner seat near the back. Half an hour later, as the vehicle sped down the highway, the driver swerved too sharply to avoid a truck. The world shattered in screams, the screech of metal against asphalt. Then, darkness. When Maya opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed. The doctor said she was lucky, just a concussion, nothing broken. But Maya soon realized the real damage was stranger than anything the doctor could diagnose. The whispers began in the ward. "I hope she doesn't notice the IV is loose. When will my shift end? I'm starving. That girl looks so fragile. Poor thing." Maya whipped her head around, but the mouths around her were closed. These voices weren't spoken aloud. They were thoughts. It wasn't a one-time hallucination. Back at the cafe, she began to hear the same thing, every stray thought of her customers and coworkers. She learned her boss skimmed off wages. She discovered regulars who smiled at her were silently mocking her patched shoes. It was overwhelming, painful, like drowning in other people's secrets. And then, one evening, she heard a voice that froze her blood. "She hasn't changed. 15 years, and she's still the same girl by the window." Maya looked up. The man at the door didn't belong in their shabby cafe. He was tall, sharply dressed, with the kind of confidence that drew stares. He ordered a coffee, his tone cool, but his mind screamed louder than his voice. "Don't stare. She won't recognize you. But God, if she only knew I've carried this for 15 years. Maya's hands trembled. She didn't know his face. Yet he thought of her as though she were carved into his very soul. His name, she later overheard, was Adrian Lee, CEO of a vast real estate empire. The kind of man who appeared in newspapers and glossy magazines. Cold, powerful, unreachable. But when Adrian looked at her, his thoughts were tender, almost fragile. She used to sit near the window, scribbling poems. She never knew I borrowed them after class. Don't tell her. She'd laugh if she knew I loved her back then. 15 years, and still, she's all I want. Maya nearly dropped the tray. 15 years. Loved her. She had no memory of him, but he remembered her so vividly it hurt. That night, long after Adrian left, Maya lay awake in her room, the whispers of his mind echoing louder than any other thought she had ever stolen. For the first time, she wished she couldn't read minds at all. Part 2. The Confession Without Words. Adrian began visiting often, always at the same hour, always ordering the same Americano. He was polite, composed, but his thoughts betrayed him every time. She looks tired. If only she knew I'd take care of her. Don't say it. Don't scare her away. Just smile, Maya, please. Maya found herself waiting for his visits, torn between dread and warmth. She wanted to tell him she knew, that she'd heard every confession he had never spoken, but fear stopped her. What would he think if she admitted she could hear the secrets he'd guarded for 15 years? One rainy night, she collapsed outside the cafe from exhaustion. When she woke, she was wrapped in silk sheets, the city lights glimmering through tall windows. Adrian sat at her bedside, his face raw with worry. "You're awake," he said softly, but in his mind, "She works herself to death. If only she'd let me protect her. God, I'd give her everything, if she'd just let me stay." Maya's heart clenched. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Aloud, Adrian said, "Because I owe you more than you know." But his mind roared the truth, "Because I've loved you since I was 13. Because you were the only light in a boy's lonely world. Because 15 years later, you still are." Tears burned in Maya's eyes. He didn't know she heard him. Days passed. Maya carried the truth like a fragile glass she dared not drop. She could no longer pretend his visits meant nothing. He wasn't just a powerful man stopping for coffee, he was the boy who had once loved her quietly, who still loved her now. One evening, she found him waiting outside the cafe. The neon glow painted his face, but his eyes were uncertain. "Maya," he said slowly, "there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." His thoughts collided with his words, raw and pleading. "Please, let me love you. Please, don't turn away." Maya stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Adrian, there's something I already know." He froze. She smiled then, through fear, through tears, through all the silence between them. It was the smile he had waited 15 years to see. And though she hadn't confessed her strange gift, though she hadn't told him she had heard every secret in his heart, she let that smile be her answer. That night, the whispers in her head no longer felt like curses. They were blessings, carrying her into a love that had waited half a lifetime to be spoken aloud.